Hi again guys, and welcome to another custom build on Gran Turismo 6 for special projects. And this particular vehicle is a racing build, of course not a replica because there is no racing version of this car in real life. A very popular exotic car on Gran Turismo, the Aston Martin One-77. Basically the ultimate Aston Martin supercar. There have been some kind of limited run or one-off creations that have been arguably even more exclusive and extreme, but the 177 is basically the pinnacle of Aston Martin, generally speaking. Now, this particular build for the car is a GT3 spec build, so you're running similar horsepower and similar weight to cars like the Mercedes SLS GT3, the BMW Z4 GT3, etc. And of course, for this build we have made some visual changes. Now, being as it is a custom, you can of course go for whatever visuals you want. If though you want the same visuals that I've gone for, I wanted it to have kind of an homage to Gulf colours. I was going to go for orange rims, but that didn't really look quite right. It looked a bit cheesy on this car to me. Feel free to do that if you want to, of course, but for me that didn't look right on this vehicle. I did though go for kind of a Gulf reminiscent blue, which is called Yas Marina blue, which comes from the BMW M4. It's a pretty good looking blue actually, and as far as the bodywork, the wings, the wheels, etc., I've gone for a custom wing, and I've gone for a wing which doesn't really have to be followed exactly, but it's a wing with a slight size decrease, but basically just go for your personal preference because obviously everyone likes the wing a little bit different. As far as the rims, I wanted to go for racing style wheels, so I went for the pretty popular BBS LMRs, and incidentally for the wheels, in terms of colour and also for the brakes, I've gone for the glitched black, aka red number 764, which comes from the Peugeot Vision GT car, which looks pretty good I think and goes quite well with that Yas Marina blue. And of course I've gone for the race number, which obviously 77 with reference to the car. So we'll now go over to the mechanical setup and then take it out of course to a track to see if this has the potential to rival racing cars. Now, by the nature of this build being as it is a custom rather than a replica, there is a lot of room for personal variation, and I personally think that those tunes are the best, because it means that two people could use this same tutorial but end up with two completely different vehicles. That's cool. It allows for personal variation and personal preference and more customization than just a pure replica. Now I've gone for racing hard tyres because obviously that's more of a gauge of how good it can actually be, being as racing softs for instance will be even better. As far as the suspension, I've lowered the ride height as far as it can go. Springs I've increased quite a lot up to race car territory, 1425 and 1525. The dampers I've increased to 5. Anti-roll I've left on 3, we've got neutral camber and neutral toe, and surprisingly for the 177, which isn't exactly known for being a great track car, you actually don't need that camber and toe. It's a remarkably good handling car given the reputation it generally has. We'll come back to the gearbox in just a second. Obviously you want your clutch and prop shaft, and as far as the diff, I personally like to stiffen up these cars quite a lot and have them err more on the side of being heavy rather than too loose. But as always, I would definitely recommend changing these settings, finding out what suits you best personally, and you could definitely make it even quicker than this. I've personally gone for halfway on initial torque, then as low as possible on acceleration and braking. And on a car like this you do want to be careful with the diff. You could quite easily make it a twitchy car, but as I said, play around and you'll find maybe even a better setup for you personally. As far as power, as I said, we are running GT3 style numbers, so 600 horsepower, 1350 kilos. Now for the power, there are a number of ways of getting around to it. I wanted it to have 600 horsepower and be rounded off PP wise, and the way that I chose to do that was by having it, or by giving it, a stage 3 engine build plus intake tuning and an oil change, then reducing it down to 62.1% power, which incidentally also allows you to have significantly more torque at that same power and PP level than you would if you didn't fit those extra parts. Now the downforce should be set a little higher, but even with the custom wing, the downforce isn't that great, and it never is on those wings, unfortunately. You want the full weight loss package, and I've opted to add 45 kilos of ballast to bring us up to the actual weight of a GT3 car, and then I've put that 40% towards the front to bring us to what I personally consider to be pretty much the perfect ratio of 49-51, at least for most cars. Not all, though. Now, finally, for the gearbox, obviously it's not a straight line machine. It's not a top speed build by any means, but feel free to change this depending on the track, depending on if you increase or decrease the power, etc. I've gone for an auto setting of 205, then individual gears of 4, 2.6, 1.9, 1475, 1.2 and 1 with a final drive of 3.2, and that's a relatively close ratio gear set. You can max it out on the red line. So, as I said, if you need more straight line speed, feel free to stretch out those gears even more. But that's it overall for what I've done for the build. Now let's take it out to a track, of course, to see if you can, to some degree, tame the reputation that this car has and make it a convincing GT3 car. Now, it's not physically possible to make a tune setup that will suit every single player perfectly. You just cannot do that. Everyone has their own preferences, even in small ways. However, I will say that this particular build, I think for most Aston Martin 177 fans, will please you to drive it, because this car does have a certain reputation as far as handling. It's known as being better as a straight line machine than around the track, a bit like cars like the Cadillac CN. Not necessarily the first choice of car that you'd use around a twisty circuit, but definitely on something like the Le Mans, for instance. This tune is the exact opposite. With a car like this, the straight line speed pretty much always takes care of itself, so you don't need to worry about that. What you want to focus on is grip, handling and control, and that is what this car has plenty of. Now, to describe it as being similar to another vehicle I've done, it handles in a similar way to some of my racing builds for the Mercedes SLR McLaren. That's a very similar car in the way it drives, so a little heavy, it requires strong use of braking, wrestle the steering through the corner, you have to be harsh with the car. But it's fast, it's competitive, and although it may not necessarily beat all race cars, it can certainly challenge them. So obviously I hope you find this build enjoyable, and feel free to subscribe for more in the future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.